My name's Steve Woodward. I'm a sessional lecturer in journalism at the UBC Graduate School of Journalism.
And what course do you teach?
Right now I'm teaching a couple of courses. I'm teaching Journalism 100, which is an undergraduate course. Let me do that again.
Yeah.
I'm teaching Journalism 100, which is an undergraduate course called New Media and Society. And I'm also on the teaching team for integrated journalism in the J School.
Do you want to specify what that Journalism 100 course falls under? Because I know it's part of that arts.
Sure. Journalism 100 is one of the courses in the Coordinated Arts program, which is a program that takes in law and various specialties. I happen to teach in what's known as the Media Studies stream. So these are students who are studying writing, film studies, journalism, various things having to do with media.
Okay, and so given that these things are all sort of media oriented, how have you sort of integrated new media platforms into your course?
Well, that's interesting because it's new media gives me carte blanche really to introduce these methods because that's what we're studying, and I think the best way to study them is to actually experience them. So what I've done, I've taught classes like this in the past. What I've always done is incorporate either Twitter or Facebook or both into the classes. And in the past I've had a live Twitter stream that actually plays in the background, projected. The reason I do that is because these are usually large lecture classes and not everybody's comfortable speaking up in a large lecture class. So Twitter was meant as a way to give people who may not want to raise their hand and talk to actually ask questions, to answer questions, or to just be snarky in class. The interesting thing I found in doing that is that the class became more than a class, it became a community, because one thing that Twitter does is introduce people to each other. So it was the ultimate social medium for a social media, for a media class. And I just found that the classes were much more casual. They were more of a community. People related to each other better. They got to know people they wouldn't have got to know otherwise. The interesting thing about UBC was that this class, unlike any others I've taught, did not use Twitter. There were very few who were on Twitter, which shocked me. And what I walked away from with that information is that maybe Twitter was on the decline. I mean, it seemed to fit with a lot of what's being talked about these days with Twitter's popularity. I don't know whether that's the case or not, but we did rely pretty heavily on a Facebook group, which I'd set up, a secret Facebook group. So essentially nobody outside the class had access to it or even knew what was being discussed. And the students really kind of flocked to that. They used it heavily. It tended to be a certain group of students who used it more heavily than others, but they exchanged information, they posted stories. It was, I think, a unifying feature. Even if people didn't post, they lurked. I could tell that people were, dozens and dozens of people in class were actually looking at or reading the posts that went up there.
Yeah, you can sort of see like seen by so and so many members of the group, right? Like that lets you know.
Exactly, that's it.
Is everybody in the class in the Facebook group?
We have 87 members. There are 87 students, but those members include the TAs, you, me, and possibly a couple of outsiders who were originally members of the class but dropped out. So I would say probably at least 95% of the students in the class out of 87 students are members of the group. So that's great.
And you said there was like a core group of students that engage with it the most.
Right.
Do you feel like there could be like is maybe for kids that, I mean, I'm pretty sure like everybody has Facebook nowadays, but say you didn't have Facebook, would you still get the most out of the course by not being part of this group?
Now, if you, okay, so.
Or like for maybe like kids that disengage with the Facebook group, you know, because like this say like there's like 15 of them that are like, you know, utilizing it the most.
Right.
Yeah. Does it like it's not I don't want to say exclusionary, but like maybe just talk about that.
Okay, right. I mean, I think that's a potential problem because I make the Facebook group voluntary. I don't force anyone to join it. Mainly because there are a lot of people who just don't want to be on Facebook. And so I don't want to make that a requirement. Do they miss out? Yeah, I think they do if they don't, because there have been lots of great things posted there. Are there a certain percentage of students who kind of don't get the full value out of a course, regardless whether they're social media or not? Yeah, I'd say there's always a group who just are not totally engaged. Or maybe not engaged at all because they just don't happen to like the subject. So is there a way to bring them in? And in a class of almost 90 students, I haven't found a magic key for making that happen. I have had other lecture classes that were in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 students, and I made participation a huge part of the grade. Up to 50% of the total grade had to be participation, which meant if you don't speak up in class, you better be speaking up on Facebook or on Twitter. You have to participate. I'll give you some tools. If you find another way to do it, great. If you want to bake cookies for the class, that's participation. It's up to your imagination to figure out how you're going to participate. But participation is key. You have to engage.
And you can engage beyond social media platforms. Like
Right.
you just said.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I used to teach a class called Transmedia, Introduction to Transmedia, and that's simply storytelling across multiple platforms. Not multimedia where you bring it all into a single place, but it's scattered. And you look at transmedia stories like Harry Potter, which are not only on social media, movies, books, that type of thing, but actually leak out into real life so that you have LeakyCon, the conventions and meetup groups and that type of thing. So I think there are ways to participate that sort of go back and forth, not just among computer platforms, but in real life.
And so how have you sort of integrated these social media platforms into the coursework?
I started off, I wanted everyone to be aware of how tied they were to social platforms these days. So the first assignment was really to catalog what they interacted with in the form of new media, and then to give that up for 24 hours. Because I wanted them to have a visceral feel for what they were giving up. So I integrated it that way, just awareness. And I've also integrated it into their written assignments because they write on, they're about to turn in a blog post on medium.com, which is really the premier social blogging platform. It's replacing blogging as we know it on individual websites. And the group projects they're doing have to be presented on a new media platform. So they're using Storify, which is able to curate social media content from all sorts of platforms, medium.com, Instagram. So they're incorporating their assignments, they're actually turning in their assignments on social platforms.
And so I guess a big thing that's happening in the open education movement now too is like when kids or students publish their assignments online, they want their peers to review it and sort of help build a body of knowledge. Like you want your work to be available to your classmates, and so it's like sharing the work that you've done. Is that sort of something you take into consideration too? Like you want the students' work to be available online, or you want them to sort of share it with one another and sort of engage with each other?
I haven't done that directly yet, but I think that's a really intriguing idea. To some extent, we do it because students, if they want, can post their projects to the Facebook group. What that doesn't do is allow their projects to have circulation beyond that Facebook group. And I know a lot of students are probably kind of shy about sharing their work with the world. So I don't know that I've cracked the answer to that question yet, but I think we're reaching a point in real life here where people are publishing, and not just journalists or people who are in media, but everybody's writing now on all sorts of platforms. And the idea is to get read. There are ideas out there, you want to interact with them, and yeah, I think it's a good thing for them to be able to do that and see what it's like. I just haven't done it myself yet.
Mm. So in a way, it's kind of like it's something you're encouraging, but it's not mandatory for students to share their work online with an audience.
Right. Yeah. One thing I do like about Medium.com is that it is a way for them to publicly publish their works, but I haven't made that a mandatory thing. If I continue to teach this kind of course in the future, I really like the idea of students' ideas getting out there, because I have some pretty darn good ones.
Yeah, a lot of kids in this class do really, really good work.
Yeah.
And sort of like for the Instagram assignments too, like you put it on Instagram, it's out there. Whether or not
Right.
people are getting to it, you're not promoting it, so it's probably going to stay within its quiet little realm. But it's still out there, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Just the idea that that anybody else with internet access anywhere in the world can come see your work. I want them to be able to feel connected to the rest of the world.
And so, do you think this sort of these methods and integrating social media into your coursework is this only viable within the journalism class, or even within this new media sort of cohort, or would this be viable, do you think, in another academic area?
I think it really has applications everywhere. It may be a limited application in sciences or engineering where you really aren't looking for a community to create an educational community of minds. You're just trying to learn formulas, and maybe I'm selling engineering and science too short. But anything where students benefit from having a voice, being able to communicate with each other, social media, there's nothing better now. It's an incredible invention that has downside and upside, but I see all sorts of upside, especially in university settings where you have these massive classes and people feel isolated and alienated, and they have no idea of the people they're sitting around. And if you start using social media, it brings those people together in a way that's impossible otherwise. So yeah, history, sociology, all sorts of liberal arts would benefit from this.
Just out of curiosity, do you think there's an argument to be made against that?
Yes, and what a lot of professors probably would say is that you lose control to some extent. If you're going to project, for example, a live Twitter stream that students are using in class, you have no control over what somebody might post. So there's a certain kind of teacher you have to be in order for this to be successful. You have to be one who's willing to take a chance, willing to give up a bit of control, be willing to roll with the punches, have a sense of humor, because kids are going to get snarky. But that's okay, because that's part of it. You know, that is part and parcel of social media. If they go over a line, then you have to be prepared to yank them back to the other side. But frankly, I've never had that happen. People know what the limits are. They know how to, if you give them a certain amount of freedom, so far at least, they know not to abuse it. But if you want to be in control of your classroom, if you want to pre-approve everything that goes out there, you're going to have a very hard time with social media.
Great, and then maybe just for that's pretty much everything. But just more just define new media. I probably should have asked that earlier.
Yeah, I mean there are various definitions of it. I like to think of it as digital media that is mediated by the internet. So, for example, CDs and DVDs I just see as digital versions of old media. But once you're able to stream video or somehow be able to transfer media across the internet, then I consider that new media.